Bienvenidos a una emisión más de este podcast que esperemos que sea uno de sus favoritos. For all the people that are going to be listening in English, don't worry, this is just an introduction for our friends that speak Spanish. The whole episode is going to be in English. Para todos los demás, este episodio está en inglés. Si quieren verlo con subtítulos, vayan a YouTube. Las ligas pues están en el canal, en las redes sociales. Los esperamos ahí y esperemos que disfruten de este experimento con este personajazo. Nuestro invitado del día de hoy es el Dr. Oliver Scott Curry. Él tiene una trayectoria muy importante en estudios sobre la moralidad y todo eso. Y pues viene aquí a aclararnos un poquito esas áreas grises que tenemos, sobre todo en Latinoamérica. Espero disfruten el episodio. Gracias. So, Dr. Curry, welcome. Thank you for being here. We are so excited. This is going to be our first episode in English. And I hope I'm having... so much good feeling that it's going to be a great one. Thank you.
Great.
Please, before we start and before we go into topic, can you please give us a brief introduction of yourself, where you come from, what do you do, where you work, and what is your area of expertise?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Oliver Scott Curry. I'm research director for a charity called kindness.org. And I'm a research affiliate of the School of Anthropology at the University of Oxford. And I work on morality and kindness and cooperation. I work on the sort of the philosophy of it, the psychology of it, and the anthropology of it. So basically, how and why people are nice and how to make them nicer.
And especially how that has helped society to get to the place that they are, right?
Yeah, you know, we all spend a lot of time cooperating with one another. So yeah, it helps to explain our social behavior and our societies. Yeah.
If I understand well, your definition for morality is is everything that cooperates to society. Is every act that is performed or done in the direction of cooperation. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. So the majority of my work has been on morality. On, you know, we all encounter sort of moral dilemmas every day, small and large decisions we have to make. We think these moral decisions are very important, and I'm interested in, you know, where do these intuitions about right and wrong come from? How do they work? What are they for? How many are there? Is it just one big one big moral instinct, as it were, or are there many different ones? And in my work, I've argued that there's nothing mysterious or magical about morality. It's a range of rules for cooperation, rules that help us get along, work together, and keep the peace. And because there are different types of cooperation, there are a range of different moral rules. There's a range of different sort of mutually beneficial ways of interacting with one another that are to the common good, that benefit everyone involved in the interaction.
Okay, yeah, that's a very interesting definition, because, you know, in previous podcasts we would talk about morality, and we would try to kind of define or thought about, you know, where does it come, this sense of goodness or that we're acting in a bad way. And we found out that it's a lot of gray areas, because especially here in Latin America, you start thinking about morality as, you know, what is the tenets of the religion. And we start thinking about don't steal, don't, do not murder anyone and stuff like that. And then we were wondering, like, but what if in some cases we actually need to murder someone in order to do a greater good? And I find your definition of morality as a cooperation to eliminate most of those gray areas, because then it comes to... Yeah, it comes to kind of common sense that and critical thinking, that, you know, if sometimes you gotta bend what you think is moral or is good in order to do a greater good, that might become moral.
Yeah, I mean, the theory that morality is about cooperation is not unique to me. I'm definitely not the first or only person to say it. You can find examples of it in from Plato, Plato, Aristotle, Hobbes, Locke, all the way through to like John Rawls more recently, and it's a fairly mainstream view in contemporary moral psychology and moral anthropology that morality is the function of morality is to promote cooperation. What I've done is just develop the idea by saying, well, look, in game theory, in the mathematics of cooperation, we know there's many different types. There's helping that sort of evolve for different reasons. There's helping your family. There's forming coalitions. There's maintaining friendships. There's bravery. There's fairness. There's property rights. So they all have a common underlying principle that they're about mutually beneficial social interaction. But there's a whole suite of these strategies, and these are our moral intuitions. These are the principles that are in play that alert us to the fact that there's a moral problem. They help us solve those problems, and we sometimes experience these intuitions clashing when we have to choose between, helping your family or helping your friends or whatever. So I think this approach certainly doesn't provide an instant answer to all of your moral questions, but I think it does bring the process out into the open where we can have a look at it. It kind of demystifies the process, and hopefully in that way makes it easier to see what the answer might be.
Okay. I have a question regarding that. For example, here in Mexico, we are very based on the United States point of view of capitalism, that is competition and free market, and there's always like an alpha, and the alpha may abuse the rights of the other ones in order to prevail. And how can we educate, or better, how much time do you think it will take to the world to educate all people to think like I don't know, like ants, like a group of living beings constructing something for the greater good, rather than I am the alpha and I don't care about your rights. Maybe I may use you, but how can you broaden the idea worldwide, and how can you, ¿cómo se dice? See, how long will it take to change, for example, a small country, and then for globalization and teaching all the people, so that not disappear, but don't see it as a fierce competition for the throne?
Well, so there's a good question, and there's a few things in there. So certainly the argument isn't that people behave well all the time. Human nature is a mixture of good bits and bad bits, and at one end of the curve you have sinners and psychopaths, and at the other end of the curve you have saints, and most of us are in the middle most of the time, being fairly good, trying to do the right thing most of the time. But so it's not an argument about how people will behave. It's an argument about the standards that what they think of as good behavior, and the standards they hold themselves and others to, whether or not we meet those standards all the time. In terms of how well we're doing, I mean, we're maybe not quite as cooperative as ants, but we are we're doing pretty well. We're social primates. We've lived together in social groups for millions of years, and we're very good at cooperating. We're very good at getting along. Historically, we're doing better now than ever. That if you follow Steven Pinker's work on the better angels of our nature, and then whatsoever the more recent one is, I forget the title, showing that the we're living historically on average around the world, we're living in the sort of most peaceful, prosperous time humans have ever lived. So it's definitely not all bad, and I don't think there's any prospect of radically transforming how nice people are to kind of utopian levels. But I do think that, like I said, that clarifying what morality is all about, I think can help all of us spot opportunities to be just a little bit nicer, just a little bit more moral, to experiment with being a bit more empathic, and see how we get on, and find our equilibrium.
For example, I think that empathy and the concept of morality that you are defining is like very like middle class. I think middle class people have more empathy because they have enough and they don't desire like the throne. And for example, poor people, they middle class people see poor people as with empathy. They may need an opportunity to grow, to have the basic services, like the ones that I consider basic, so they can be good. But the poor, since they don't have anything, they may be, ¿cómo se dice? Celoso,
Jealous.
envy,
They may
jealous,
envy or jealous.
or and resentment. They may have a lot of resentment because they don't have, and they feel like the other ones don't matter. Doesn't matter. They don't care about themselves, like the poor people. And for example, the rich people, they want it all. They want all the cake, or at least they are portrayed like this in movies. That and movies are the form of education, because they, for example, in history, they don't say how rich the kings were. We just inferred, but we actually in ¿cómo se dice? Right now we only see rich people as I want it all in all movies. I want it all, and I win. For a few examples of rich people that shares are like, that's kind of new, like Iron Man, because he made progress, but he also sells weapons. And for example, a new personal Jesus for for many people is Elon Musk, since I think that he's a great exponent of like progress, not charity and morality and compassion, but I like progress, and I like that all people progress, like human race, and I think that's kind of the way of your message, but it lacks like more moral and empathy and compassion traits that may not align necessarily with capitalism. That is, I will be number one. I will catch all the Pokemon.
Well, there's certainly different cooperative principles, different moral principles that can come into conflict. So, I mean, for example, you were talking about capitalism. To the extent that capitalism just means free trade, free exchange, then it's an enormously good thing in that it's a very good generator of benefits for everyone involved. It involves virtues of trust and honesty and reciprocity and gratitude and guilt and a whole range of moral emotions. So, capitalism in that sense is an enormous engine. It's a kind of enormous cooperative scheme that's outgrown, that's got vastly bigger than sort of anyone might have predicted or anyone might have realized. But there's also some side effects of it, that to the extent that it's generated inequality in outcomes, that offends some of our other intuitions about fairness or property rights or allocation of who owns what. So I would think that for the most part it's a benefit, but yes, it has created some other problems. And in terms of the sort of movies and the alphas and things like that, I think it, like, you know, in the movies you have heroes and villains. So you have the high status individuals are heroes and villains, and the heroes are people who compete for status by doing good things, by helping people, by saving people, by building things, by enforcing justice, by avenging as the Avengers do, or by being generous and so on. So they compete. They compete by who can provide the most benefits, whereas the baddies, the villains, compete by who's the biggest bully, who can kill the most people, who can beat up the most people, who can impose the most costs on others. So again, going back to these different aspects of human nature, there's different ways of making a living, and there's different ways of becoming high status. You can become high status by being what's sometimes called dominant and nasty, or you can be high status by being prestigious and providing benefits. What we want to do is try and shift. We're always going to have people striving for status. There's always going to be alpha males and females, but what we can do is try and create the conditions, the social conditions, where it makes more sense for them to compete in constructive ways rather than destructive ways. So one simple thing that comes to mind is I think it's the Forbes 500 list or something, or the Forbes 100 list has the list of the world's 100 richest people, or 500 richest people.
Yes.
Forbes also runs a philanthropy list. So just by sort of inventing this scheme of let's have a top 100 people who've given away the most money, they've, as it were, created an alternative league table, something else to compete over. And the very status-minded philanthropists will see that list and go, Bill Gates has just inched me off the top spot. I'm going to do something about that next year. I'm going to give an extra, $1 billion to give directly or something to get up into the top spot. So that's a very simplistic example, but what a good project for social engineers is to try and create ways for people to compete constructively rather than destructively.
Okay, that's a good point. And for example, what you establish may be antagonist to the American concept of capitalism, that is no communism, no for everyone. No. There's only capitalism and alpha competition, position for the alpha, competition for alpha position. And Americans and also politics make this very clear. Like Obamacare was like a communist benefit for everyone, and that was considered communism. Traits. How can they understand, like, yes, that is not communism, that's the contribution and help for the society, since we are a society, the members of it. They need to have basic, ¿cómo se dice? No derechos, sino services, basic services, and maybe health is essential for everyone. Maybe, or like it is. And how can we like brainwash with common sense that that's not communism, that's not Satan, that's good? Yeah. How can we do this?
Well, so there's two things there. I mean, the kind of, again, it's got simplistically the kind of thinking about communism versus capitalism. The communists didn't get rid of status. They just made status and power dependent on loyalty to the party, or loyalty to the dear leader. Whereas, and as a result, their economies collapsed. Whereas capitalism, for better or worse, makes status depend, amongst other things, makes status depend on how much money you can make, in the sense of how much can you make a business that generates that makes things that people want. Can you how much value can you generate for other people? Now, of course, that has some unintended side effects, but as a basic engine of civilization, it's much better to have people competing to make things for others than it is to have them competing to be the most loyal to an authoritarian regime. So I think that's a net benefit. But certainly when it comes to people, Americans discussing policy, yeah, it's completely idiotic. They in the impression you get is it's extremely polarized in that you can't talk about shall we increase taxes a little bit? There's some costs and benefits of doing that, or should we lower taxes a bit? There's some costs and benefits of lowering taxes. You can't seem to have that discussion. It's got to be either, oh my God, the choices are. Some people want there to be imaginary. Some people want there to be full communism, and other people want to cut all taxes for everyone. And then everyone goes to war, and no one figures out exactly where to set the dials.
Yes, it's
and repeat that for every policy debate, it seems.
Yep. Hey, and just coming back a little bit to the anthropological sense of morality, I have a question. Why do we see this kind of a standardized sense of morality across global cultures, even when they evolve isolated or a part of each other?
Yeah. So just to go back half a step. So there is this theory that I've been working on called thinking about morality as cooperation, and it predicts that there's at least 7 types of cooperation that will be considered morally good, always and everywhere. A few years ago, we did a big test of this theory by looking at whether we could find examples of these kinds of moral rules. Just to simplify, like the 7 moral rules are: it's morally good to love your family, to help your group, to return favors, to be brave, to defer to your superiors, to be fair, and respect others' property. So one question that people had about that was, well, that sounds okay, but is that just a Western view of morality? Is it just a ethnocentric view? What about all these other cultures around the world? So we went, I thought, fair enough. So we went, and obviously people have argued about moral relativism, and different cultures have radically different meanings of moral. So I thought, fair enough. So we went to the archives and we read through hundreds of accounts of ethics from different cultures. And the short version of the story is that we did indeed find examples of these moral rules all around the world, and we found examples of most of them in most cultures that we looked at. And there were no counterexamples where any of those things were morally bad. So there does seem to be this common core of universal moral principles that everyone agrees on. But the theory doesn't predict, and we weren't testing this, but it wasn't our impression, excuse me, no, that moral systems were identical everywhere. On the contrary, the way a good way to think about it is that our moral psychology, our moral instincts, are a bit like a graphic equalizer with different dials on, if you know what I mean with my fingers. And everyone's got the same dials or sliders or whatever, but they're set in different ways in different places. So in some more traditional societies where people are more surrounded by more of their family more of the time, the principle, the kind of the ethics of kinship, the obligations you have to your family, are, people feel those are more important than the obligations you have to strangers, for example. Whereas in more modern societies, in cities where people are less, more of their interactions are with strangers and their family lives miles away or in another part of the world, then relatively speaking, the ethics of how you interact with strangers to do with reciprocity and fairness loom larger, feel more important than the ethics of kinship, for example. So we have these basic, everyone seems to have these basic principles, every individual, every culture have these principles, but exactly how they are ranked, how they're ordered, how strongly they're endorsed varies between people and between societies for would predict fairly straightforward reasons like how much do you interact with your family.
Yeah, and we see that especially in Latin America when we say like family is king, and no matter that your brother is like a criminal, you gotta help him out no matter what. And then you
Right.
go to the Anglo-parlant countries like United States or UK or those where if your family is are criminals, you cannot
Yep.
you can detach from them and just like forget about it. It's
Yep.
it's a very interesting a sense of kind of belong. Where do you belong? And here in Latin America, family is like is king. That definitely.
Yeah. Is there a particular phrase that's family is king? Is that a particular idiom?
Yeah, they say that the family is everything. In Mexico, it's like family is first, family is everything.
Like Torero in ¿cómo se llama? In Fast and
in Fast and
Furious.
Furious.
Yeah,
That's
it's so interesting because when I was first getting this work off the ground like a few years ago, and I would say to people, okay, so I think that there's seven moral rules, and it's look after your family and do this. A common conversation I'd have with people is they'd say, well, looking after your family is not a moral rule. I'd say, what do you mean? They say, well, that's just that's just selfish. That's just what you expect. That's not it. On the contrary, like being moral means, like you say, not favoring your family. It means being impartial. Being impartial is morally good. Being partial to your family or your group or whatever is morally bad. So I would have loads of discussions like that with people, and I'd think, I'm pretty sure that's what's a kind of a parochial ethnocentric view. I was pretty sure that I'm pretty sure this is like looking after your family is going to be quite a widespread moral view. And you step outside. It wasn't exactly in Oxford, but you step outside Oxford, and lo and behold, there's whole well, like you said, family's king, family's everything. And there's a beautiful experiment recently. A colleague of mine. It's amazing. Again, I'm going to tell you this experiment, and you're going to go, well, duh, of course. But this was a big surprise to psychologists. So he had a great experiment. He had a great experiment with a dilemma in, and what he said, when you can do this little test yourself. So Ryan McManus is the psychologist in Boston College. So he just said, imagine a guy runs into a burning building and saves his brother, right? How, marks out of 10, how morally good is that? How morally praiseworthy is that? So what would you say, Ernesto and Raul? Like,
I would say, if I run into a burning building and then my family's in there and then there's some other individuals, I will, of course, tend to go for my family first.
Sure, but okay, but you see someone run into a building and save their brother. How would you how morally good is that? Would you say out of 10? Marks out of 10.
I would say a 10, definitely.
Okay, 10. All right. Well, this experiment might not go well then. So then, imagine on a separate occasion, you see somebody run into a burning building and save a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
How morally good is that?
To me,
also 10.
Yeah, to me, it would be
10.
also 10. It's like,
Okay. Wait,
if he's doing good.
This might work. So they both get 10 out of 10. Fine.
Yeah, to me, yeah.
So now, so they're both equally good, is what you said. So but now imagine there's a guy runs into a burning building and there's two people, but he can only save one. One is his brother and one is a stranger, and he saves the stranger. How morally good is he now?
If you put it like in the same context, in the same reach and all that, you tend to feel that saving a stranger is less worthy.
Yes. Okay. So with your data, with our experiment here, with the two of you, in isolation they were both equally good. Mm-hmm. But if you have to choose and you save the stranger, that's less good. Suddenly, you said they were the same, but now one of them's worse. Yes. And more or less, that's what this study showed. They showed that I'm making up the numbers here, but they found that people thought that saving your brother was, it's pretty good, 6 out of 10. But saving a stranger, oh wow, what a that's really going above and beyond. That's doing something extra.
I think
That's an 8
that's
out
the
of 10.
problem.
But it reversed when the person ignored their brother and got the stranger instead. Then it was like, oh my god, how could they do that? They're some kind of monster.
I think that the problem there is the choice, the capacity of choice, the free will. I don't know, like you can either save him or not, or save the person or not, but the existence of a choice, it balances I think a lot of things for good or bad. So in here, although both things are good, since there is a favoritism, like it may be taken always also in politics as sí se dice favoritismo. Like favoritism, like I choose really for my good, and that's always, well, that's how I look at least at the media. If someone like Bill Gates, he said like cooperate with AstraZeneca, and then the media say, but why? I was like, do you have a deal with AstraZeneca? You want to make money? No, that's because they have the better resources. I know how they work, how will distribute the vaccine. But people always say, oh no, you have another interest. Like that's the common reaction of people when you present a choice in something. And I don't think, but we are educated or maybe wired to think that, oh, that's for his good. And I don't know why.
Well, I think so. This is somewhat separate to that previous experiment, which was a very well designed, well controlled experiment, which just showed that it's almost that people take, even quotes Westerners or even Americans, it's almost that they take the obligations to family for granted, and they only notice them when they're absent, and then you realize how important they are when they're absent, as this little as this experiment showed. But more generally, as you say, like I say, people aren't all good. Even when they're cooperating, cooperating sometimes puts you in a vulnerable spot. It puts you in a place where you can be exploited. So if I help you today and you help me tomorrow, and we're both better off, as I help you move house and then you help me move house, we both win. But if I help you move house and then you say, oh, sorry, I'm too busy, then you double win, because you get my help, but you don't pay the cost of helping me, and I'm out. So building cooperative relationships is a little bit risky, and it opens you up to being exploited. So people are also, you said jealous. People are also, if that's right, we're jealous of, are wary, are on the lookout for potential cheats, and certainly they can overestimate. It's like a fire alarm. They tend to be very quick to question or scrutinize somebody's motives to see if they're really going to be cooperative or not.
And for that,
but it can be overdone. You can become cynical.
And for that part that you mentioned, that we are opening a door for exploitation when we are kind of more agreeable and cooperative. So by that definition of morality, that it kind of rewards the agreeable traits, and for the people that kind of live in the society, is that not making that more kind of aggressive people to be alienated, and that as a result giving that the meeker to prevail on evolving in society, and also risking it? This has a little bit of agenda, okay, this question, but doesn't that morality makes that the society evolves with a weaker, more agreeable beings, instead of rewarding those that are a little bit more aggressive, more go-to-getters, and more competitive?
Well, I mean, if morality was just about one type of cooperation, then maybe it might favor. It might have. We might all have ended up becoming more and more agreeable and more meek. It's not. I mean, it's not just. It's not the case that being cooperative is just about being sort of compliant or agreeable. Like I say, you have to be vigilant, and you have to. There's. You also have to avenge. There's negative reciprocity as well as positive reciprocity. So you do me a favor, so I do you a favor. But if you hurt me, then I am motivated to hurt you in return, to retaliate. So even the basic type of cooperation, like reciprocity, involves sometimes you need to be tough. But there's also other principles. There's other cooperative principles like the like being brave, like being heroic, or like we said, like striving for status, and that involves a range of things, but it involves being, strong and brave and rich and generous and magnificent and magnanimous, and a whole bunch of other traits that people are proud of, people want to show off about. So yeah, there are many dials, and some of them, sometimes it's good to be agreeable, sometimes it's good to be tough, sometimes it's good to be brave.
So it is. So aggressiveness is rewarded if they're kind of not violent. Just call it that way. So you can be aggressive, meanwhile you're not disturbing the order or something.
Well, I'm not sure about aggression, but I mean being assertive can be a good trait. Being tough and brave, either just in the simplest case, showing off how tough you are as a way of deterring aggression from others, can be mutually beneficial. But ideally, showing how tough you are by shouldering the burdens, or by helping other people, is even better. Like we were saying before about the heroes in movies and in real life.
And a question for the justice systems. So the justice systems, are kind of this way to bend immoral actions just to justify them as moral. With more documents, if you're gonna kill a criminal, then you gotta document the whole thing, and you gotta go to a trial. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a way to justify that this guy deserves like an immoral outcome out of it. And the question is that the justice systems define morality, or morality defines justice?
Well, I mean, morality is a broad term. It includes a whole bunch of different virtues, including justice as one of them.
Okay.
Who knows? There's no perfect definition of justice, but if we think of justice as, like I was saying, negative reciprocity, so you've done something wrong, so you should be punished for it, you should incur some cost, then it's just a particular example of in that case kind of negative reciprocity. In terms of the justice system or the legal system, I don't work on that directly, but I think the basic argument there is the justice system is a way of slowing things down and trying to reduce errors. So once upon a time, in simpler societies, if everyone took the law into their own hands, but when you had individuals and individual families and individual small groups all seeking revenge individually, they made mistakes, and they they retaliated against the wrong person, and they overdid it. Their response was disproportionate, which invited a response in return. So you have have cycles of violence, you have feuds that go on for generations. And one of the things that, I mean, it's almost the rise of modern governments is that involves like centralizing the power of retaliation, so and professionalizing it. So rather than everyone individually taking the law into their own hands and being kind of amateur police and amateur judges, now we have professionals that obviously still make mistakes, but are better than the more chaotic situation that we had before.
Yes, for example, here in Mexico, and I think also in the United States, which the side with which wins is the one with more money always, because, for example, if it's a fair trial, lawyers cost you money. So
yeah,
if they like postergate, or if it is not an efficient system, it will be slow, and money will finish for the poorer side. So for default, by default, the rich guy wins, and that's very common. For example, ¿cómo se dice fuero?
With
Like
the politics, like
in
the
politics, there's a term here called fuero, that is like,
yeah,
I
you
don't,
can. Yeah,
I
there's also in the United States when you cannot get in office politicians into legal disputes. I don't
it's
know.
like, I'm not guilty because I have
immunity.
power, and
Immunity,
for
yeah,
a limited
political immunity.
immunity, and that's like, why? Because I have power, and
Yeah,
that's enough. But
yeah. I
that's
mean,
like,
people can be unjust. I mean, people can be bad and unjust. Injustices happen.
no,
But I
yes,
mean, the mere
I
fact
know,
that
but how can you combat this? How can you make like a more just system, not just like saying, that's unfair? And yeah, we know, but how can we avoid these kind of situations in a society?
yeah, that's a good question, and it's not one I've got an answer off the top of my head about. But I mean, obviously we've managed it, and if we invited on a political economist or political theorist or legal theorist on, it would be very interesting to hear how did some countries succeed in putting the rule of law over the rule of individuals. I don't know, what would it be in the UK? It would be, but once upon a time there was a king who could do anything he wanted, and then he wanted loads of money off his barons, and the baron said, well, we're only going to give you this money if you behave and sign this contract. And bit by bit, the parliament of barons exerted more power than the king, and then fast forward a few hundred years, and here we are. And that institution has taken off in some places more or less than other places.
I mean, you will think
exactly how, I don't know. It's a good question.
I mean, what I would think about that Riley's saying is that the society tends to autocorrect themselves when the corruption is too much, because the people is more than the those in the power. So when the oppression is so hard, it will boil down into kind of a revolution, and self-correct the system once in a while. So I mean, in my opinion, this is only my opinion, if you want to keep the power, you gotta keep at least some sort of happiness and stability of those dominated. So I think that if you are extremely abusing them, and the situation is completely unfair to the point that they have nothing to lose, they will just go ahead and try to turn you down.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And I mean, I'm just thinking primatologically and what people have argued, but I mean, lots of species, lots of primate species, and other mammals and other animals in general, that lots of animals have alphas that are not very nice to everyone else. So it's not like this is a uniquely human thing. You find it all over the place. What is uniquely human, or maybe not unique, but is much more developed in humans, is that all the others, whatever, the betas and the gammas and the beta, gamma, deltas, everyone else, again, it's cooperation. All the rest of us are good at ganging up on the alpha. So in lots of species, the alpha is the biggest individual, and none of the other individuals are bigger than him, and that's the end of the story. In humans, maybe none of us are bigger than the alpha, but together we're more powerful than the alpha, and we keep them in check. And you see that there's a similar principle at work in a democracy. I mean, that's basically what democracy is. When individual voters are not particularly powerful, but together they can remove people from power and replace them. So I don't know. I guess the very broad answer is people power.
Okay. And just coming back a little bit to the moral systems that we talk about, we have, I mean, from my point of view, I see two major currents of how morality is being administered. One is, or maybe managed. One is kind of the all-seeing God, that we see that more in the West, and then we see the honor codes in the East. So why Asia, or why the East is so lean towards the code of honor instead of religion, and why we in the West are more leaning into all this Christianism and Catholicism principle? Have you studied that?
Not directly, but I mean, we there's honor codes in the West too. So I mean, that book, I forget his name. There's a book called The Cultures of Honor about why the American South has an honor culture compared to the American North. Some of the classic studies of honor and honor cultures and revenge and feuds and everything were from, I want to say, Montenegro or that kind of area, in Europe, I presume in Christian Europe. So I think there's honor cultures all over the place. I was reading something a while ago where I was reading a paper about describing an honor culture on a Pacific island, in a Micronesian island, and it was remarkable because the way they described it, it was almost identical to what was going on in, I want to say, Montenegro or Albania or somewhere like that. So here were two places on the opposite sides of the world, with exactly the same moral system, although obviously never had any contact with each other at all. So in answer to what I think your question was, or one before, the reason why you find these things popping up in similar things popping up in completely separate places is because they face similar problems. Both places people compete for status, and in both places they form dominance hierarchies as a result. And the logic of dominance hierarchies is more or less the same whether you're talking about the Pacific or the Balkans or even in some other species. In terms of what was your other question, how does it change? Well, it changes when it changes when you start to have centralized authority, when the task of punishing people, of prosecuting injuries and slights, is more successfully taken over by a just central authority. When that begins to happen, when the law is taken out of your hands, people don't take the law into their own hands as much.
And these kind of religions and honor codes are the result of uh, trying to kind of keep in check society, because both of them depends of if you get catch. If for religion system, morality is God is always looking at you, and if you do bad, He will know, and you will punish eventually, even if justice doesn't catch up to you. And in honor codes, it's like you can be an asshole. Meanwhile, the your neighbor doesn't figure it out because now you dishonor the family. But both of them seems to be like a way to keep individuals more in check, to be complying with this morality expected from them, the comparative in society. Is is this a result to kind of keep in check society, or the necessity for religion and honor is separate from morality?
Well, I think different religions promote different things. Different gods want you to do different things. So the God of the Bible, or the New Testament God of the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
wants you to be like you're saying, meek, and He exalteth the humble, and He wants you to be meek and agreeable and compliant and fair and universalist and all the rest of it. Whereas the Norse gods, or the gods of classical of Greek mythology, want you to be an awesome badass and be beautiful and proud and a fierce warrior. And if you dishonor yourself, if you're a coward, you don't get into Valhalla. So it depends on which god you're talking about. And then you think, okay, well, so why do different places have different gods? Unless they're all up there arguing about what we should be doing, the argument would be, well, it's the same as before. But different people in different societies face different problems. In some cases, in small, let's say for argument's sake, in small scale societies where you are on the hierarchy and whether your tribe can beat next door's tribe, those types of cooperation are extremely valuable. So we value them, and we call them moral values, and we give those moral values a magical aura, and we project them onto the clouds, and our gods want us to be fierce and vengeful. Whereas with the rise of large-scale societies initially in the West, the benefits of being fair and trustworthy were greater, so we valued them much more. And what a surprise! The gods of these big societies want people to be, meek and humble and compliant and agreeable and all the rest.
There's there's kind of tendency for humans, that I know that I have to be part of and part of this community and help my community and all that. But there's also that part of individualistic, even almost selfish way to be of the human, that is also looking for their own benefit. And in the path that we are evolving, and we are understanding that being more competitive and being more agreeable, do you see that the human being will eventually understand to be selfless is the best way to go, and kind of finally eradicate those evolutionary traits that call you for look for your own benefit first?
The short answer is no. So it's a bit like if you build a gorgeous building, you start out in the dirt, and you build a nice strong walls or whatever, and then on top of the building you have all this fancy decoration. You wouldn't say, well, if only we could just have the fancy decoration without the foundations, without if we could get out of the dirt, if we could just have these things that float in midair, wouldn't that be great? Well, I guess it would be great, but it's not really an option. It's certainly the case that many of our cooperative strategies, many of our moral intuitions, our moral impulses, they cause us to be they cause us to be self-sacrificing in some conditions. So, for example, for our family members, or as a hit, in some cases of heroism. So we expect people to do extraordinary things sometimes, but it's not realistic to expect people to do extraordinary self-sacrificial things all the time. That's not a sustainable strategy, and no moral system could survive if you were constantly having, if all the members, it's like those strange religions. If your philosophy is you should remove yourself from the gene pool or the idea pool, then you won't be around for very long. So and again, people often think of like the only options in life are kind of egoism, like selfishness, or altruism, sort of purely helping others at a cost. And those are not the only options. There's enormous space in between of mutualism, of mutual benefit, where we can, by working together, we can both end up better off. And that's a far more productive way of living, and it's a more sustainable way of living, it's a more attractive way of living, and it's the way of living that we find morally appealing. We have these intuitions because they generate mutual benefits. So all these things like being loyal and reciprocal and brave and generous and fair and respecting others' property, we value all those things because it works and it generates benefits for everyone involved.
Okay, I have thank you for your time. I have a last couple questions from my friend from Japan, and he was he asked me to make sure that I asked them to you. He's very sorry for he not being able to join. So he lives in Japan, and he has all these shocks, cultural shocks between how they define morality, and especially human relationships that they don't tend to value that much. It's more kind of utilization of friendship is only a mean to get something, or something that he's kind of how he describes. So his question is like, do you what are the if they are the most notable differences between Asia and the West on terms of how they understand a moral or kindness?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of I'm not sure, like there's a kind of category of East and a category of West, and there's some big difference between them. But certainly cultures vary, and one way in which they vary, the basic answer is the importance of family. Like we were saying before, there's a gradient from how important family is. It's the most important thing by far, like you were saying, or it's just one of many things, and it's other things are more important. And like I said, traditionally, and I'm no expert on Japan or China or anything, but traditionally family came. What China, for example, seems to be experiencing is this dial being turned down and everyone being surprised. So traditionally, family was the most important thing, and then slowly you see people becoming capitalist, as they would say. To suddenly the old values are no longer not as valuable as the new values of commerce and trade and everything else. So that seems to be one. I'm not exactly sure where Japan is on that scale, but that's certainly one dimension along which societies seem to vary.
And the next question that I have for him is, I think he noticed that you didn't include Japan in your studies. Is there any particular reason? Did you think about it, or what was the reason?
No, not my fault. So we in the study I mentioned, we looked at 60 cultures around the world, 60 societies around the world, and we were using somebody else's list of cultures. So the database, the archive that we were looking at has hundreds of different 300 and something different societies in it. In the 60s or 70s, the anthropologists thought this is getting a bit out of hand. Let's come up with a list evenly spread around the world, and let's focus. If we're going to compare cultures, let's focus on these 60 cultures. And so that's kind of a standard sample that people use, a representative sample. and that's what we use too, and it happens not to include Japan. But your friend will be pleased to know that we've recently had a look at the other cultures, at the other 250 cultures in that archive, which I think include Japan, and nice. so he should have a look at our next one of our next papers.
He's very aware of your papers, and he reads them as soon as they are available. Oh, and yeah, he was the one who sent me a few to read before interview. And just one final question that I have. Now that you mentioned about the dials, those 7 principles that you laid out, and each culture has them in a different set. Do you see kind of a difference between first world countries and third world countries? Are those dials set similar across them?
I don't know. I think it's the same as in principle. They could be in principle. All these things could vary. And
just let me elaborate, because my question comes because you say China that they had the family dial up high, and right now that they're going into capitalism and they're a developing country and they're kind of more similar to a first world country. Family are getting toned down a little bit. And if you see all Latin America, especially, which they're like third world countries, family dial is up in the sky. That's, that you can see that across. And you see, developed countries like, Europe and States and Canada, family is also kind of not that in the high spot. So that's, that's what gets wondering, if those dials are similar all across the first world and all across the third world.
I don't know, but that would be a viable hypothesis, and certainly people have argued that there's a recent book by the anthropologist Joe Henrich, which is exactly about this topic. That in Europe, I think the argument is that it was, I don't know how planned it was, but anyway, in Europe, the Catholic Church essentially broke up families. They changed the rules about who you could marry, and you could only marry your something or other cousin rather than your first cousin or closer, and that just that kind of disrupted and diluted families, and as a result, other forms of social organization took off and proved to be very productive, very profitable, and boom, you have the rise of Western civilization. So I don't know exactly where and at what point different countries are on that scale, but on that variable. But yeah, that would be that is a live hypothesis. Yeah.
Okay. I finished my questions. I have like a great time talking to you, Dr. Curry. I appreciate your work, and I think it's very, very interesting. Just as a final thought, we reached to a bunch of teenagers, and I would like to ask you, why should be kind to each other? In your study, I know you also study in kindness, and what you have figured out in a secular way, not because God wants to be kind to each other, but why should we be kind to each other?
Yeah, well, so so in my work for kindness.org, we've shown that helping makes you happy. So we did a review of all the experiments that have been done, looking at if you, for example, ask 100, if you give 100 people $10 and you ask half of them to spend it on themselves and the other half to spend it on somebody else, the people who spend it on someone else, surprisingly, end up happier than the people who spent it on themselves. So on the face of it, that's somewhat surprising, but from the perspective I've been talking about, it makes sense. So we're social animals who benefit from these cooperative relationships, and spending $10 on someone else it's a good investment. It's a good investment in creating, not literally giving people $10, but in helping other people is a good way of making new friends. It's a good way of it's one of the most attractive traits in a mate. Across the world, people say that kindness is what they're looking for in a partner. So if you do something heroic, if you do something amazing, and so on. So it's a good way of getting the respect and admiration of your peers, and it's a good way of making the world around you a better place. And so it's easy to explain why eating makes us happy, because it satisfies an important desire. It's easy to explain why having sex makes us happy, but exactly the same logic explains why helping others makes you happy. It's because we're social animals and we feel connected and supported and respected and trusted and loved and all the rest of it. I would encourage your listeners, your viewers, to give it a try. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. On the kindness.org website, we sort of generate. We have a whole bunch of ideas of things to do, of kind acts to do, the familiar thing, everything from, saying hello to the bus driver and holding the door open, all the way through to donating a kidney or donating money to charity. Like I say, there's a broad range of things you can do, and the science says that if you give these things a try, you'll be glad that you did. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to go from 0 to 100, from doing nothing to selling all your worldly possessions. Most people are already somewhere on that scale. So I would say just try the next level up and see how it fits. And you might find your new equilibrium suits you very well and suits those around you. So yeah, give it a try.
Thank you for for that advice. Well, I don't have anything else, and I appreciate your time. I know you have like a very tight agenda, and I'm really grateful that you find a slot for us. And that's it. I mean, is there any web page or social media that you want to share? We can put it down in the description of the video, but just tell us where people can find you.
They can go to my website, which is www.oliverscottcurry.com. I'm on Twitter as Oliver_S_Curry, or you can just search for me. There's my papers there, some more easy to read summaries, and I have a TED talk up there, and a few other things you might be interested in.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. Thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you, guys.